Thank you. I think it's important to emphasize, first of all, that Lloyd's Register Foundation exists to engineer a safer world. And one of the ways in which we do that is through a safer maritime system. So lots of the things that we're trying to do are all aimed at people having safer outcomes. So when we're thinking about soft skills, whether that's leadership or cultural awareness or anything like that, we're thinking, how will this make people more safe? Specifically, and perhaps most pertinent to Posidonia, we're working with Helmepa on a program called Metavasi, and they have recently developed, with our funding, a soft skills masterclass. And one of the things that's important to emphasize about that masterclass is that it's not done to seafarers, but has been developed with them. So it takes their insight, their expertise, and their understanding and creates something that is more relevant. I think that's a concern in a number of different ways. First of all, if there are insufficient crew members, then that's a safety concern. If those crew members are not trained in the right way for the right technologies and the right fuels, then that's a safety concern. If seafarers are also suffering from some sort of cognitive overload because of all of the different types of training or tasks that they are being exposed to, then that also becomes a safety concern. But there are probably things that we can do about it. So, for example, the types of training that we do can be altered. So rather than relying on a relatively 19th and 20th century paper-based system, I think the advent of new technologies will ultimately allow us to use things like artificial intelligence and data analytics to create personalized learning paths for seafarers, which perhaps might make training more efficient. And I think it's worth pointing out that that's a big concern at the moment. I mentioned previously our Metavasi program. We do know through that program, which has surveyed over 2,000 seafarers and maritime professionals in the Eastern Mediterranean, that 70% of seafarers cite fatigue as their biggest safety concern. So I'm not saying that the answer to that is simply to throw more training at them. I'm saying the answer to that is to think about how training is delivered and how seafarers are asked to operate ships and the processes and systems on those ships, and to think a little bit more carefully about human-centered design. I think that's a really interesting question, actually. And to go broader than that, I think one of the major misconceptions is that we have time. It wasn't too long ago that we were making the case that by the mid-2030s, 800,000 seafarers will have to be trained in alternative fuels. Now, of course, whilst the world is changing and that figure might not necessarily be true anymore, the fact remains that technologies are rapidly outpacing the changes within the training and education system. So how quickly we train seafarers in a system that is probably still a training and education system that is probably still based in the 20th century, and that's not peculiar to seafaring, is really, really important. We are updating STCW, of course, but by the time that is changed and all the agreements are made within that framework, it's probably going to be out of date. So we need to think carefully about what we can do to train seafarers in a rapidly changing environment in the face of multiple challenges now, not in the future. I think this is really important, and my key message is simply put, simply listen to seafarers, because it's their perception of new technologies and new fuels that will determine the pace of their adoption. And then from Lloyd's Register Foundation's perspective, the pace of that adoption determines how quickly those new systems can be more safe and indeed make seafarers and the ships more safe.